Hello. Hello, welcome to the webinar. I see people are joining, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to first start by introducing myself, and then I'll invite my fellow panelists to introduce themselves so we can run right through our presentations and get to the Q&A, and make sure you all are, you know, have all your questions answered. So please use the Q&A box to add questions, and use the chat box if you have any technical questions. My name is Mollie Cohen D'Agostino. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Davis, and I also direct a small center called the Mobility Science Automation and Inclusion Center, which partners with the Department of Electrical and Computer Science Engineering to do cross-cutting and interdisciplinary research on mobility science and automation. I'm going to turn it over to Camila Correa-Jullian from UCLA to introduce herself, and then we'll go with Melody, and then we'll turn to our presentations.
Hello, everyone. My name is Camila Correa-Jullian, and I'm currently a postdoc at UCLA at the Garrick Institute for the Risk Sciences and the UCLA Mobility Lab. I'm a mechanical and reliability engineer by training, and I've been working on autonomous vehicle space for the last few years. So thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Melody Drummond Hansen. I am a strategist at Acute Strategy. My background is I was recently the Chief Counsel at Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, which is responsible for reducing crashes in heavy trucks and buses. Before that, I was in private practice as a lawyer, running transportation and automotive groups at multiple law firms focused on automation, connectivity, and emerging technologies. Really pleasure to be here today with Mollie and Camila.
Yes, thank you so much, Melody and Camila. And thank you to Alejandra Soda, who's our event specialist who will be supporting this event. She'll be answering questions in the chat, and we will be recording. So no need to use an AI chat service. We will have the recording available afterwards. Okay, thank you so much. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll share my screen. I wanted to include, in addition to introducing myself, which I've already done, I'll also say that our slide deck includes some relevant papers that you may reference for some more information about what we're researching. But the project that we'll be talking about today is on autonomous trucking, safety, and labor. This is a project that UC Davis and UCLA worked on collaboratively, and was funded by the state of California through the UCITS annual allocation from the state's gas tax. So thank you all for contributing to our research through that mechanism. One of the reasons we conducted this research is that the state is at an inflection point related to autonomous trucking. And that inflection point has actually reached quite a peak because this year they've introduced new regulations. The California DMV is introducing new regulations that would open a pathway for automated vehicle trucking in California. The comment period is actually open for the most recent draft for that. It closes on December 18. So take a look at that. There's been some interesting additions to the previous draft that was released in the spring. So our project goals were to assess the state of the autonomous freight industry, to consider some expected effects on the workforce, and to think about how we can make recommendations for policymakers. So we have a two-part strategy of our work. First was a set of expert interviews, and then we conducted a synthesis using the interview findings and literature sources. So our interviewees that we conducted 18 interviews, and you'll see the sectoral representation here. A large percentage were academic, followed by engineering experts, industry experts, labor, government association. This is industry associations, typically economics, economists, and legal experts, as well as manufacturers. So this is who we spoke with. So pretty good cross section with a little. It leans heavier on the academics, and we're aware of that. But according to our experts, we first talked about automated driving assistance systems, which we'll refer to here as ADAS. Those systems, we use partial automation, and we want to know how prevalent those are in the market. So we saw that the experts agreed that these assistive or partial automation was prevalent, and there was debate about emergency braking, whether that even qualifies as an ADAS feature. The estimates of current penetration were 1 to 50, so pretty big range across our expert group. And near-term estimates were 10 to 80, so a little more. And then the longer-term estimates were 30 to 100. So there's really this belief that, there is a low-end estimates, or the high end is 100%. But I will say that all of these estimates had a high degree of experts claiming unknown, reflecting considerable uncertainty. And you'll find more about this in the details of these of the answers to these questions in the paper, and that's forthcoming, and we'll share that with webinar participants. Regarding the state of automated driving systems, which means fully driverless or fully autonomous, we asked about the state of that industry, and really largely everyone agreed that there is incremental market growth, with some estimates, several people estimates that there were less than 100 driverless trucks at the time of the interviews, which was in September of 2024. And although some of the interviews ranged between the fall of 2024 and the summer of 2025, so there were some estimates that were later, but none that included this 100 driverless trucks estimate. So we did, so that needs to be that has changed, and there may be at least 50 more trucks available today. Somewhere between 100 and 200 is likely the real number, but this still needs to be validated. But according to our experts, there was a varying about what the future looked like for ADS, right? With some believing that less than 10% of truck fleets will be automated, even over the next 20 years. And some folks thought it would be more like 30 to 50%. And no one guessed that there would be more than 50% ADS in the truck market in the next 20 years. So they think this is an important finding. Safety is a big driver of this industry, and really largely industry experts really emphasize this role of safety. If you look at this quote from an industry expert, we'll see that they believe that the best case is incremental adoption that dramatically improves safety. Not replacing routes or runs that people really want to do, but maybe even excitement about new job opportunities that might free up more money and pay drivers more. So we asked our interview folks about what their best case and worst case scenarios would be for driving, and we recognize that this is this is not going to capture all the nuances of this important topic, but we thought we'd reflect on those best case and worst case and highlight some of the sentiments. So on the best case side, we saw that folks were considered that improving road safety was a common factor. More than half of folks said road safety is really the key driver of this of their success in this space. On the worst case side, we saw that rapid deployment could cause technical missteps. This could lead to failure events or fatal accidents. Something like what was referred to as a Chernobyl event, some kind of catastrophic accident that could really set the industry back. That could be a worst case scenario on the safety side. On the labor side, we also asked about best case and worst case scenarios. And we saw that, there was the trucking and government pointed to the value of trucking as a great profession with lots of upward mobility. This was emphasized throughout each of those interviews with government and industry. But that labor shortage kept coming up as well. Labor shortage was a theme between government and industry stakeholders, that there's a threat on our economy and our goods movement unless we address this labor shortage. And they predict that the ADS is not the key driver of labor demand, that there would be other drivers, right? This is that that labor demand is complex, and that the ADS market is going to be more affected by the tides of the globalized of shipping market rather than the introduction of ADS. So that was an interesting finding as well. Academics and others pointed to large disparities of wealth in we're talking about the status quo amongst existing drivers, where some have great quality of jobs and are well compensated, and others unfortunately do not. This may be part of the job quality issues may result in turnover, which some call the worker shortage a myth, believing that in fact there is not a worker shortage, but there's a job quality issue. So this is a debate where some believe that this worker shortage is a reality and others see it as a myth. In terms of labor perspectives, we also see the worst case scenarios where it could be a de-skilling, making jobs less value, lower skill and lower pay. But best case is opportunities for improving worker experiences, pay for more skilled, good management. So these are sort of dichotomous alternatives, right? And amongst the labor perspectives, we do see emerging roles have promise, but there's concern that a lot of the emerging roles will depend on geography and institutional availability. So opportunities for current truck drivers will require public policy in order to steer those careers towards emerging roles. So to synthesize our findings, we felt like we could say that driverless trucks are coming. They're coming slowly. Experts agree that far future estimates will present a modest market share, not a full market disruption. There will be a coexistence, and this will cross 3 sectors in truck platooning, automated driving assistance systems, and fully driverless. And another key finding that we found in the literature, referencing this paper written by Leah Kaplan, is that driverless trucks will not be humanless, right? They will be in pre-drive roles, frontline vehicle roles, frontline off vehicle roles, and these will and each of these roles are critical to the success and the safety of these vehicles. So pre-drive would include maintenance as well as engineering, as well as emergency assist. Emergency assist would be more frontline. So frontline would include folks that would include the safety drivers or the emergency assist or others that will be on vehicles on site. And then there may be off vehicle frontline workers like remote assist and remote drivers, which really there's a huge variance in the number of and types of those support staff that will be frontline but off vehicle. So turning to policy strategies, we recognize that this is early days to even consider policy strategies. So these are really just opportunities for more research. So each of our policy strategies are not implementable today, but they would require more research to understand what are the costs, what are the benefits, how do we really balance those? So one strategy that we really heard in our interviews and in the literature is this need to future-proof the driving workforce. And this is not because the jobs are being threatened, but just that would give more this would encourage more workforce participation if you conveyed this idea that these jobs are long-lasting jobs, and you do so by encouraging workforce training and really encouraging understanding of the role of new technologies in improving safety and work and job quality on site. We also think partnerships are critical. This is a theme that came up in terms of collaboration and partnerships. This could include secondary educators, where we could develop, future-oriented workforce programs and cost-sharing incentives among industry unions and trade associations. I've heard this in our interviews and among experts in the field, that this need for training and partnerships to think about is critical, not just to address the lack of drivers that are entering the workforce, but also to address the fact that automated vehicle firms are working for folks with a unique set of skills. Often they want to have CDLs, they want to have experience on the road. So, another policy strategy that we suggest is about public safety, not just for the general public, but also for the workers involved. And this is really going to be a huge focus of Camila's presentation, focusing on this role for the need for focusing on public safety broadly and on the need for safety in emergent roles. So I won't belabor this, but we can see safety standards as an important approach. And she'll speak specifically to metrics that may inform these standards. And we need more research and regulatory sandboxes for testing and consistent liability norms. This is something that came up amongst legal experts, to ensure that, where there are issues, that it's clear who's responsible and that drivers, whether they be safety drivers, remote workers, are clear on what liability they hold by participating in this sector. We also need to look at near-term we have to hold a mirror up for the near-term worker shortages. Again, thinking about how innovation can leverage that and improve work conditions for today's truckers. So this means leveraging partial automation, establishing what routes are least desirable and need critical coverage. And so we can think about how we can really partner on how we pilot routes they'll be win-win for across the stakeholder groups. So then the last suggestion we make is that there will be the need for greater coordination and collaboration across stakeholders. So amongst industry, regulators, and labor, there's a need to come together, right? There's a need for more discussion. There's a recognition that there's not a lot of opportunities, not a lot of venue for this kind of discussions amongst our stakeholders that we interviewed. And there's a need for data exchange, that where they can share safety relevant data. So that's something that came up especially from government folks. And then I think the need to have cross-sector working groups where folks can really come together and improve outcomes is really critical. So this is just, we need to find the win-wins, and we need to make settings that we can all come together. So that's what we have today. This need for collaboration strikes across all of our previous strategies. And, we really are focusing on collaboration across the UC. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague at UCLA to take over and talk more about safety strategies for both automated vehicles and more general automated trucking. So please take it away, Camila.
Yes, hi. Well, thank you, Mollie, for setting the stage. I will share a little bit of my research, which actually deals with methods to quantify the safety risks that you were hinting at before. That not only addresses like the general public, but also the safety of the workers, whether they're going to be present during testing or actual operation of these systems. So my focus is specifically on quantifying safety risks of human system interactions in autonomous vehicle space. What I'd like to discuss with you today is certain avenues of research that can support this ongoing discussion in the trucking space. So in this presentation, I'll directly jump into the high-level motivation and what could this mean for the design and operation of heavy-duty automated vehicles. There are two studies which I'll reference. The first is a model-based exploration of safety metrics tailored to this trucking use case. And second, a more general study that we're conducting with driving simulators to demonstrate how we can actually collect data to back up and justify the use of these metrics. So, as we know, currently the development of automated driving systems and autonomous driving is in an evolving technological, commercial, and regulatory environment. Automated driving functions are expected to be deployed at various levels, such in passenger vehicles, transport, or commercial freight vehicles, right? And while the standard SAE 3016 is very specific of like what every level of automation means, in all of these applications, at least again in the short to medium term, humans will still interact with these systems, either as drivers, as passengers, as operators, or as fellow road users. Which is why we are interested in studying the implications of human autonomy interaction on operational safety once these systems are actually deployed, and understand what could this imply for heavy-duty automated vehicle testing and operation. So from a design perspective and an engineering perspective, any system will have a set of fundamental tasks it needs to complete. When any level of human system interactions is expected, the question is how do we allocate these tasks and if they were to change under emergency situations. So this is what the standard J3016 addresses. But to answer this question, we have to consider how different control transition and intervention mechanisms are decided. Who and when are they in charge of the system and how could this change? What are the fallback and redundancy requirements? And what are the actual operational limits of both the human and the automated system? So my research seeks to develop models that can help answer that. First, by designing the system or the team of human and autonomy, then by conducting structured risk modeling, and finally by conducting experimental data collection and validation, with the purpose of moving towards designing explainable, trustworthy, and fair mechanisms of human interaction in mixed autonomy settings. So how do we measure safety? And this leads to a first study. So safety metrics play an important role for formal verification and validation purposes. many methods to derive these metrics actually are described in safety standards such as the ISO 262, the SOTIF, and also the UL 4600. And these usually describe either lagging metrics, things that you can quantify after an event has occurred, and leading metrics, which hopefully try to describe the safety or unsafe behavior before a catastrophic event occurs. But what we see is that they're mostly developed from a functional safety perspective and focused on the actual system, and do not consider the role of humans as integral elements to the system, for instance, as a safety backup. And there are ongoing efforts in trying to define more operational safety metrics per se. So on our side, we set out to derive metrics from different human system interactions in the AV space, and in particular, identify which are specific to heavy-duty freight operations. So before I continue, I need to do a small detour on how we quantify risk and the contributions of humans to system-level risk. So human performance has been incorporated into probabilistic risk assessment through human reliability. This discipline draws from areas such as cognitive science, human factors, and accident investigation to estimate the system's risk. It has a long history in nuclear power plants, aerospace, and other control room operations. And many of these methods rely on constructs that we call performance shaping factors, essentially risk contributors that alter the probability of a human failure event. This also includes not only the agent, but team dynamics, the role of the organization, different elements from the scenario and the system design, and also the environment. So as automation became increasingly prevalent across different domains and industries, there's a need to update our understanding on issues such as automation complacency, warning design, and emergency protocols. How simply requiring human oversight for automated systems may introduce new hazards if not properly considered for the system operation or testing even. So our aim is to expand this, but to the driving automation context. So what do we do? Based on current company models, let's say from the last 10 years, and relative scientific literature, we've defined like high-level tasks that can be performed by all the agents that may be involved in freight automation. Now, Mollie hinted at this before, but they are different operational profiles, right? Some companies may be more may be confident in exploring the level 2 levels like ADAS for many years. Some systems will implement level 3, some systems will implement level 4, right? The idea is that level 4 is designed to perform all driving tasks, including the fallbacks. But there are many elements or situations in which this doesn't necessarily can be guaranteed. So that's why you introduce different operational constraints. But particularly during testing, the role of the safety drivers in this case is mostly to supervise and intervene if necessary and or to complete sections of the drive that the system cannot do. And as I mentioned before, depending on the local jurisdiction or the company, safety drivers may also play a critical role during operation. So at a very high level, we divided of who monitors, who plans, who executes the driving tasks, and who can initiate control transitions. And we analyzed the safety criticality of these tasks using a variety of different risk models to try to prioritize which are the interactions that are more safety critical. So essentially, we wanted to propose metrics based on these safety critical tasks, and it comes as no surprise that in reality, a lot of these were tied to control transitions, right? And also the impacts of drive monitoring systems. But for today, I will focus more on the actual control transitions. So what did we actually develop? A traceable method linking high-level safety risks to both the human and the automated tasks, and then derive safety metrics, as I said, from these interactions. These account, in this study, we account for over 500 tasks across testing and operation, assessing the contribution of hardware, software, human, etc. So having this whole breadth of knowledge now that we've created, we want to connect it to specific PSFs, these constructs that I mentioned before, and try to justify them through empirical studies. So we went back, we discovered that there's a broad gap between human and autonomous safety metrics in the literature in the AV space, and specifically related to freight safety, particularly because there's still a potential broad range of different operational profiles. So I will quickly mention the families of metrics that our master student that she worked on this proposed. Some of these are quite logical, such as the lagging metrics, and others require a little bit more in-depth analysis, such as the leading metrics that are here, which again focus more specifically on the human-system interaction. And I would like to briefly stop at what we called the divergence of driver AV decisions. Essentially, when a safety driver, or a remote operator, but in this case a safety driver, would disagree with the automated vehicle's decision. This was a key element, separate from the design and the safety of the design of the, like from the engineering perspective. It's more of like, how do you either train your users, your operators, to understand the system decisions and give them fair mechanisms to intervene if they have a valid reason to disagree with them. So this was a key element in which we started to like dig deeper of what happens if the roles are unclear, or what happens if there was not sufficient training. And then how do we collect the data and build models that we can justify these thoughts that we've had of what are the most safety critical tasks. So that leads us to the second study. So this study sought to develop models that quantify the safety impacts of different elements, such as design and environmental, and also the personal profile of the drivers. So I do have to clarify that this was a general study that looked at regular drivers, specifically interactive with a level 3, but it focused a lot on takeover scenarios and emergency situations. And while it was not focused specifically on trucking, the data that we collected helped us derive a virtual human autonomy team model, which this is what I want to spend a little bit more time afterwards in the slides, which paves a way to more specialized research questions and specialized data collection opportunities. But first, how does an autonomous vehicle silent failure affect the driver's perception and reaction to risk? And to answer this question, we had 72 participants interact with the driving simulator, and we collected both subjective and objective data to quantify these constructs, the PSFs, and inform safety metric design inspired by the previous results, the previous study's results. So the scenario was quite simple in reality. The automated vehicle would drive across town, keeping a safety distance with the surrounding traffic, which was equivalent to 5 to 7 seconds of time to collision. At some random point, which wasn't so random, the AV would start exhibiting a tailgating behavior, essentially a proxy to an unspecified failure that breached this safety distance, having the time to collision available safety time. And we toggle two elements, the traffic density, and the one that's shown on the slide, the availability of warning, which was triggered 5 seconds to collision. Now, participants were told that the system may or may not exhibit abnormal behavior, and it may or may not show them that there was actually a failure. So in this case, we will see how the warning pops up. So this is one of the conditions. And the next condition, you'll see there's nothing wrong, and we're kind of relying on the driver to detect that the safety distance is not safe anymore, and which may lead to collisions. So participants were briefly trained, and we explained to them the rules of the system, and then they were tested under different scenarios. And questionnaires were applied after each intervention, looking for changes in the risk and workload perception. So we collected a lot of data from this simulation, starting with vehicle kinematics and dynamics, driver takeover response times, traffic violations, and safety outcomes, in addition to all the risk and workload perceptions that I mentioned before. And we tested them to understand if the different levels of traffic and the warning availability actually influence the safety outcomes. So at a very initial high-level answers, here we have two examples of the myriad of different graphs that I had, but the first deals with the collision probability. And you look at this graph and we can say, oh, the collision probability is significantly lower in low traffic scenarios and when warnings are available. But the efficiency diminishes significantly under higher traffic scenarios. This not necessarily comes as a surprise, and it reinforces a lot of ideas that we have previously from the study. And the second element that I would like to highlight is the frequency of heartbreaking events, which we were kind of exploring as a surrogate safety metric. We learned that in this case, it's actually not a safety metric that's useful to tell you if the warning was useful or not. It's much more affected by the traffic situations. So we have different kinds of this analysis linking the driver profile to different safety outcomes and their perception and so on. But what I want to talk about a little bit more is how the richness of the data enabled a different kind of analysis of building a virtual driver ADS models, such as the one that's in the slide. Now, I know that looks complicated, but what I just want you to take away from this is that every node here is linked to a PSF that was constructed from the data from the simulation and from both the questionnaire and the actual objective simulation data, let's say. And I want to highlight the top node that basically talks about the driver profile, which represents their driving experience, their underlying bias or trust towards automated driving. And all these are like customizable factors that can be used to represent different populations. These nodes are connected then to their specific scenario perception, depending on what were the values of our independent variables and how these trickle down to the actual safety outcomes for every scenario and every test and so on. So this is how the distribution of every node actually looks like. And again, won't go into details about all of this, but I do want to point out the probability of collision, which is right down here in the bottom of the slide, is at 38%, which is quite high because we were making the scenarios very challenging, right? But I also want to talk about the driver profile. Now, of course, this was a short story, and interestingly enough, we ended up with a crowd that was slightly more risk averse than I would expected, and also slightly more trusting and biased towards automation. So you can think of like how this profile would be different for commercial driver license holders or older populations and so on. So how does this actually work? So we can make inferences about each of these different nodes. So we could ask, what happened if we were looking at driver takeovers? So the driver took over without the system prompting them. Why? Because they potentially thought that there was risk and they wanted to avoid it. Did the system give any indication about it? We don't necessarily know. And then we pair it. What happens if the person who took over actually was predisposed to trust in the ADS and had lower levels of experience with the systems, let's say. And then we know that the probability of collision increases from 38 to 51%. We know that this probably occurred in a high traffic scenario when there was no warning present. And then we can see how the different like responsiveness or the perceived trust of the driver towards the system changes. What are the perceived severity or the perceived workload and how all these things changes. Now, what I want you to take away from this is that this kind of model, we can collect specific data for different profiles. And the strength in this is just that we can tie elements such as the organizational impact, the level of training, the level of experience, the explainability of the design, the availability of warnings, or how transparent are those warnings, how do they trickle down into the actual safety outcomes that we're looking for. So what does this mean for heavy-duty AV operations? So I'll go back to this diagram that I started at the beginning of how, in reality, all decisions of task allocation from design to operation have to be in reality risk informed, right? And this seems like a very abstract concept, but we turn it down to like, hey, we need safety metrics. The metrics can inform various processes, and the impacts of the task allocation and fallback mechanisms have to be tied to safety outcomes. For the heavy-duty AV space, safety drivers, whether in testing or in operation, must have explainable and reliable warnings and intervention mechanisms. And the idea is that models such as these can provide, let's say, a path to show what is the role of the organization and training and design elements in mitigating these risks that I just told you. So there's a lot of future avenues for this. There are two different ones that are immediate of our interest. Knowing that the AV space has changed in the last couple of years, since which we originally thought about the study, remote driving assistance has become a much more serious talking point, which is fascinating to study from, like, again, a human reliability perspective. But also the idea of how, now that we know what we know in the study, how can we collect and like tailor these results for the trucking space? Knowing that testing and operation stages may be different, and knowing that training and their experience is fundamentally different. So anyway, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Camila. So we'll turn now to Melody, who's going to provide some respondent comments on the previous presentations and some other guidance on how to go forward.
Yes, thank you again, Mollie and Camila. And for those who may have missed the intros and you're wondering who is this lady, I'm a former Chief Counsel at Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So my responses are informed in part by, I'll first talk about what I got from each of the presentations, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I think policymakers can do with this. So first, these takeaways are my own. So if you don't like them, don't blame Mollie and Camila. And I see that we have a really great audience here that has a mix of folks with policy backgrounds, industry backgrounds, engineers, and at least one truck driver that I recognize in there. So looking forward to folks' reactions and what you got out of this. But, I guess the first takeaway is really we've spent a lot of air talking about that AVs are going to take away jobs for truckers. And I think the data just doesn't bear that out in terms of the timeline on which we're going to have increased automation in the industry based on what we see in the world and based on what these experts predict. And I'll also note that Mollie's study also includes a really good literature review that has a lot of great, it's worth it just to go flip to the back and go to the bibliography and see what stuff is cited, as does Camila's on the existing standards in the industry. So those are really helpful resources for someone looking to get up to speed quickly. And one of those that Mollie cites is by an author, Kristen Monaco, with co-authors, that's about the notion of the driver shortage in trucking. And essentially, I think the data is bearing out that it's a myth. And again, views are my own. But what we have is driver turnover and working conditions that make certain parts of trucking less attractive for experienced truck drivers. And that's something that every trucker could tell you. But that we are taking a long time to collect the data to prove that out. And so we cannot depend on AVs to solve our shortage for drivers at any time soon. Even if you're on the camp that thinks that there is a shortage, AVs are not going to be the solution to that. We need other solutions to the working conditions for truckers, which is not only a sort of economic justice issue and a national competitiveness issue, but also a safety issue. As Mollie also pointed out, heavily automated trucks require a lot of human teams to design, test, and manage vehicle fleets for the foreseeable future. So there are a lot of emergent jobs that are going to exist, and we need to prepare for those jobs in pre-drive, in-vehicle, and remote operations. And as Mollie pointed out, the worst cases that there are risks of de-skilling, where actually the increased automation leads to drivers losing skills that they used to have as drivers, or as some experts pointed out, a potential industry event that makes everyone pause on automation. So there are policymaker opportunities to address these near-term working conditions that are known and have been known for quite some time, prepare workers for emergent roles, and address information gaps and ensure safety, including through regulation. So Dr. Correa-Jullian's presentation, what did I get from it? One, we need safety metrics beyond lagging indicators, right? The collisions are a measure. A lot of the measures that we use for safety right now are really inadequate for if our goal is to prevent accidents and to understand, for example, how AV trucks or ADAS trucks might compare to human drivers. Some safety standards do focus, as Camila pointed out, on hardware and software, and not the humans who are going to interact with the vehicle in some way or another. And so there's an ongoing need for operational safety metrics that consider these things. They consider leading factors for safety that are preventative of these lagging indicators like crashes. We need operational safety measures that consider the human and systems interaction, including, as you were pointing out, Camila, that very multicolored chart you have where it's like by task, we need to understand this, right? And there are specific factors for heavy duty trucks and CDL holders that are very different from the passenger space and need to be considered. Human takeovers, whether that's an in-vehicle testing driver, safety driver, level 3 or remote operator, present challenges to humans. This is one of the key concerns about humans in a seat, right? Is that you can become complacent with an automated technology, and that actually makes the situation potentially more dangerous. And we're putting the human in a difficult position to take over quickly for a machine that has failed. And I think what Camila's study has initially found is that there are warnings that may be effective. And that's good news, because there are many studies that are concerned that warnings are actually a distraction to drivers and that drivers start to ignore them. And her paper also points out the impacts of high traffic and stress factors that may actually lead to human takeover more aggressively, but it also may lead to more difficulty with the warnings being effective, because it may be more difficult to reduce the time to collision and that sort of thing. And as Camila pointed out, there's more study opportunity to explore the implications for trucking, specifically for areas like remote assistance and safety drivers. And I note here level 3 versus level 4, because something that hadn't really occurred to me until working with Camila on this presentation was how the driver in types of laws, or the desire for safety drivers, leads to a muddying of level 4 versus level 3. And that has, I think the implications of that have not been fully considered, including, I think lots of folks think, oh, why not just have a backup driver in the seat? That's got to be safer. And I think what your studies are pointing out, Camila, and it's in line with previous industry studies, is it may make the situation less safe, and it may put an unreasonable expectation on that safety driver to take over. What does this mean for policymakers? The current state of regs and standards is at the federal level pretty paltry. And we had a first US DOT AV policy in 2016 and first federal bills in 2017. There actually are state bills dating back to at least 2011. So we've been at this for a long time in the AV, I'd say AV generic, AV passenger space, and not a lot of federal advancement in formal regs. You've got states filling the gaps. Most of them are not focused on trucks. Some exceptions to that are some recent California and Texas activity. As Mollie pointed out, we have proposed federal bills. I read that there are something like 16 of them in one House committee. The prominent one that addresses trucks is the America Drives Act, which is presented by Representative Fong. And then the other thing that's been happening is industries, cities, and standards orgs have been filling gaps by coming up with standards, by coming up with voluntary programs and education. But again, most of the regs and standards are AV generic or AV passenger focused. And just as a reminder for those who weren't in the space or didn't notice, some of our early regs explicitly excluded trucks. So trucks are not something that we have considered in the way that we need to in this space. So how can we start to do that? One, we need to recognize this as a regulatory race as much as a technology race. We need to be able to translate from existing safety regs and procedures for trucking to AV trucks and at scale. I heard at a recent conference, a member of CVSA talk about the enhanced inspection they've developed for AV trucks, but that they're concerned that they're not going to be able to do that when trucks are at scale. So we have to prepare for that eventuality. We have to consider what we can learn from the AV passenger deployments and what we can't. We should learn from what states and cities have as their experience. Generally federal regs look to preempt the states. That doesn't mean that we can ignore what they're doing and what they're learning in implementation. And we have to understand the distinct needs, just to underscore Camila's point there as well. The in-vehicle versus remote operators are different. We need to understand that. We need to understand ADAS versus ADS. And we need to consider the credentialing that is needed on vehicle and outside vehicle. And finally, address the working conditions for trucking now and in the future. As I said, AV trucks are not coming to solve our labor problems. So let's get started doing that.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for those insights. Really bringing it back to ground us on the earth here on what we can really do. And what really needs to be done, right? Where are there sort of overblown concerns and where are there real concerns? And I think that's what I want this discussion to include as well. And so I see a number of questions in the chat. So this is your chance to put questions in the chat.
Mollie, can I jump in quickly? Because
Yes,
I did
please.
write it in the chat, but I kind of want to like just my two thoughts of like I would like to clarify that from again system risk design perspective, introducing humans as safety backup can be responsibly done, but it needs to be designed correctly, right? That's why we need to take all these factors into consideration. And there are many reasons which it may not be feasible to remove the human just because of the risk of the operation or the special like needs of the operation, right? And experience from other safety critical industries have shown us like the value of having flexible human responses to different incidents, especially because we're going to have people interacting with first responders and law enforcement and customers and et cetera, et cetera. So this should not be dismissed in AV space, like either for onboard drivers or remote assistance roles. The technology may be very reliable, and it will depend on the specific use case whether that reliable enough is enough to remove the human or not. And if so, it's fine. But if there is going to be a human, these are the things you need to consider. So,
Right. And actually, this is a
nice.
fantastic point because this is actually some of the motivations of our projects. We're actually looking at the driver in bills that were introduced in California and really trying to think through, does the existence or the absence of a driver in and of itself really affect safety? And I think that was a question that we had. And I think that we need to really all investigate that because in some cases, yes, and in other cases, no. And it's really hard to it's not a simple picture. Yes, safety driver equals system is more safe, right? And in some cases, that existence of a safety driver could be adding some risk, but in some cases it could be removing other risks. So it's hard to develop that full risk analysis to really make sure that we're considering all the factors. So that really was one of the motivations of this project is to really think about this. So that's a really great point. So turning to our questions from the audience, and like I said, this is your chance to do it. I'll ask a question about the hybrid runs, right? Where there's human drivers are used for the first and last stretches, but not for the middle. I guess this was a question, was there consideration of this? And so I'll just mention that in our interviews, this came up quite a bit, and at sort of discussion about whether there would be a need for the middle mile being covered by automated vehicles and then, complemented by regional drivers that were positioned in places where they would be able to pick up the load and move it to a final destination. This would mean that they would be theoretically able to go home at night, sleep in their own beds, and have a slightly, and for some, that means that improved quality of job. And so that is something that is definitely under consideration. I think not just, it was across all industry sectors. We saw that this was something that is discussed as one of the best case scenarios. But I think, yeah, actualizing that on a regional level, really the workforce that could accommodate it, I think is another question. And I think there's still, still some road to travel there to get this to really operationalize this idea.
Yeah, and I think both your points, Camila, I appreciate you making that clarification on safety backup, and your answer to this question, Mollie. And I think from both your papers, I think one of the lessons is the technology is complex, safety is complex, and the labor effects are complex. And so to really understand them, we're going to have to start looking at different segments here, right? And that includes finding the best places for AV trucks or ADAS trucks to be effective. So I think that's another lesson learned from your papers is we're going to have to start looking at not just AV trucks or not, but for what?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Okay, shall we turn to another question? So another question was focusing on how recent truck accidents make or break the case for wide-scale adoption of ADS and ADAS. I'm not sure exactly which accidents you refer to here, but but I think that let's hear from our panelists on this question. Do you have any thoughts on whether accidents move public opinion towards or again away from this idea of more automation behind the wheel of trucks?
So I can jump in a little bit about this. It's a really interesting element, the risk perception of these kind of incidents, and I think this discussion is more, it's discussed more widely in like the robotaxi space because they have become more visible. There are many reasons to not dismiss like these small incidents that are still, let's say, are not Chernobyl level incidents, right? We there are many reasons to trust the engineering complexity behind these systems because they are very difficult, and there's a lot of the industry which is very, very interested in making sure that these systems are well designed and that we don't have Chernobyl level events. I think the industry takes these things very seriously, with the caveat that we do interact in a very complex environment. So of course, I mean, a very let's say a very non-committal answer is that it will really depend on the incident. But there are a lot of other safety factors that you have to put on the scale, right? Are we comparing it to the best driver? Are we comparing it to the average driver? Are we comparing it to the amount of fatalities that we could avoid in a year or at least reduce in a year? And what kind of incidents are we avoiding and things like that? So the answer is nuanced. Public opinion is very nuanced. There are many other reasons that is not safety, why people have strong opinions about AVs. And I think those will likely be more influential to the growth and the sustainability of these companies going forward.
I agree with all that. I would combine this question with the next one, which is, accidents, unintended events with unintended results happen often because of ignoring the obvious rather than ignorance, lack of knowledge, e.g., not stopping at the stop sign or red light. Have you explored this aspect, i.e., ignoring versus ignorance, and if ADS, ADAS is advantageous on this aspect? So, to me, these two are related questions, and for the first part, FMCSA has made everyone unhappy in the way that they measure safety, perhaps for their entire existence. And it's been a subject lately of a lot of notices of proposed rulemakings. For example, when FMCSA stopped publishing collision data about certain carriers because FMCSA had determined that 80% of those collisions were caused by what the trucking industry calls four-wheelers, human drivers in passenger vehicles. And so this is also another reason that accidents are a really imperfect measure of safety, because if you think about accidents without digging into causation of those accidents or the conditions of those accidents, you don't know a lot. And I think one of the underappreciated potential benefits of both ADAS and ADS, and importantly, automatic emergency braking, which you pointed to, Mollie, is the ability for the vehicle to respond, to not necessarily improve the human driver in the seat, because CDL holders who are qualified and who are trained and who have experience are the safest drivers on the road. They drive millions of miles without an accident, even when caused by someone else. But one of the big benefits of ADAS and ADS and AEB is the ability to more quickly adapt to mistakes made by others. And I think that's part of a systems approach to safety that is underappreciated because we're so focused on a notion of one-to-one pulling out a driver for another driver. And I would say one of the problems that we have is we do not have a lot of data, either in the passenger space and certainly not in the trucking space, on how what mistakes human drivers make. And with a lot of increased technologies, including increased technologies used in trucking today, we have the ability to gain a lot more baseline knowledge of how people drive and the mistakes that they made and the leading indicators, right? That are relevant to safety and that we can learn from. So I think another underappreciated benefit of these increased automations is all the data that we're going to get about driving, about routes, about other drivers that will help us refine the way that we think about safety in total. So I kind of talked around your question, but I hope I gave you a satisfactory answer, and you guys may have other opinions.
Yeah, this very, very important points. Absolutely. And you know, I think that's why we need to build more of a lexicon on how to talk about risk, right? Like, what are the risks associated with trucks versus the risk associated with human-driven trucks versus autonomous trucks versus light duty in both those spaces, because you know, we know that there are faults and there are hazards, right? That's how you determine risk, right? Identifying faults and evaluating hazards, and considering reactions to hazards and how you would react. And so as we think about risk in this space, I think we need a lot more research to understand and help the public understand the risks involved. Please.
Yes, and I would really jump in quickly because the last comment was really good. The last question about automation complacency, and this is a thing that we've been dealing from a design perspective for many years. I think there's a lot of science behind it, a lot of engineering and human factors and cognitive science behind it. There's a lot of experience that we can learn from aerospace, from aviation things, and essentially looking at these safety critical industries that have dealt with this kind of operations before. And I think it's a challenge across disciplines and across domains of like, how does the risk management change when you start introducing less explainable and more automated responses? And how do you deal with these things from a design standpoint? So I know I went very quickly over the question, but there's a lot of training and a lot of experience from the actual truck drivers that we need to better understand how can they be incorporated into the system design, which I think a lot of companies have done the effort, have put in the effort. There's a long way to go, that's for sure.
I wanted to acknowledge Desiree Wood's question as a former truck driver and women trucking organization leader. And one of the final things we did in the last administration was get out. I know, Desiree, you may not agree with me with the usefulness of the Women in Trucking Advisory Board, but what we did get from that is women truckers know the issues in the industry, and they're often the sort of canaries in the coal mine about broader labor issues and other things in trucking as in many other industries. And you know, she points out that there isn't a truck driver shortage, and I encourage folks to read all of what she said there about that. But I wanted to acknowledge another part of what she said, which is about extreme weather conditions. And I think this is an area that we also underappreciate, and we worry about this for autonomous vehicles and their ability to adapt to weather conditions rightly, and different stretches of road and the like. But the way that we currently credential human drivers, whether it's in passenger or trucking, does not require us to demonstrate capabilities in all of those conditions. So I just wanted to kind of point out those aspects of her question and acknowledge that.
That's an interesting point. Absolutely. I agree. I think that Desiree's comment is well taken, and certainly some insights there that we should highlight. The also, you know, the collisions that relate to wildlife, you know, where, you know, this is really a big concern. And I was in a Waymo recently that successfully navigated around a coyote while we were in Phoenix. That experience was pretty profound for me, because, you know, having been in a lot of wildlife related incidents, living in the rural places. So I think that the solution here is right, you know, and theoretically in the dark, a LiDAR will be able to see an oncoming wildlife faster. But the question is, you know, do truck drivers have the training that would equate that, right? Can the ADS or ADAS system really do better than a trained truck driver? And I think that's where we need more research to understand that, to really, before we jump to conclusions about which one would be safer. But it's still a really important point. So I think to conclude, we have just 1 minute left. I'll turn to my fellow panelists to provide any final comments, just a couple, anything else you want to add, and then we'll wrap it up.
I just want to say, thank you to you guys for the research you're doing, and it's so important that you're focused on trucking in the way that you are, and it's no doubt going to be useful to policymakers as we keep navigating this. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes, and say also from like an engineering standpoint, understanding the nuances of different use cases is really fascinating. So there's been a lot of a challenge of how do we bring our very complicated black box models into like, this is something that you should care about. This is how this can inform decisions. And this project opened a lot of those like, I'd say eyes, but like avenues to how we can continue doing this. So this was fascinating to work on. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you both, and thank you all for joining us. There will be a recording of this webinar posted on the UCITS website and elsewhere. So we'll share some information with you by email as well. Once again, thank you, and we'll conclude the webinar.